Rouleur is the world's finest magazine of cycling and cycling culture. Established in 2006, Rouleur interviews the world's biggest cycling names and covers the world's biggest cycling races. Visit our website at rouleur.cc and subscribe to support our in-depth features, long reads, independent journalism, stunning photography and immersive cycling coverage. I'm Edward Pickering, I'm the editor of Rouleur, and this is Rouleur Conversations. There's a new edition of Rouleur out, number 134, which, like all cycling fans right now, is focused around the classics. Through this magazine, we're taking our readers on a journey which begins at Milan-San Remo's Poggio and goes via Flanders to the Ardennes, just like the World Tour peloton itself. And since this is Rouleur, there will be a few detours and tangents en route. We're going to be hearing from Sean Kelly, Lizzie Deignan and Andy Schleck about how they won Liège-Bastogne-Liège, plus Becca Charlton about her interview with Fifer Georgie, our very own staff writer Rachel Jary, and of course Rouleur photojournalist James Startt, the King of Paris, who is just back from Strade Bianche. James, how are you?
I'm all right. I had a great week in Tuscany. Did tons of stuff with Rouleur, Rouleur Italia, Rouleur Online, Rouleur Travel, and also saw one of the most amazing races of my life, my career. Just amazing. So I love that week. I think it's one of the great weeks of racing in the calendar year.
Just to note that listeners to Rouleur Conversations are eligible for a 15% discount off the price for a regular subscription to the magazine. Go to rouleur.cc/subscribe and enter the code podcast15. And also, as James just alluded to, if you're interested in a cycling holiday, we now have a travel company. Rouleur Travel offers challenging point-to-point cycling experiences tailored for adventurers seeking both physical and emotional journeys. We had a group out in Italy for our Strade Bianche experience. Upcoming trips include Rouleur en Provence, Mont Ventoux to Monaco in May, the Maratona Dolomiti in July, Rouleur Pyrenees in August, and Rouleur Pacific Northwest, Seattle to Whistler in September. Go to rouleur.cc/travel to find out more. So, James, Rouleur 134. There's an iconic cover to this magazine, which is a nod to a couple of features we have.
Most definitely. I think one of the most iconic cyclists ever, Rik van Looy, who I was able to finally meet last year. And I've just been working on that for a couple years, chasing him down, and finally got to meet him. And yeah, it was a memorable moment.
Yeah, let's talk about that feature later on. I loved what Enrique Adel, our genius art editor, did with this cover. We had the image of Rik van Looy in his Flandria casquette, and Enrique decided to treat it using a halftone effect, which basically makes it look like an old newsprint photograph. Also a reference to another feature we have in the magazine, which is about the Flemish cycling media. But amazing what effect a simple image on the cover of the magazine can have, James.
It was just so minimal, just so captured the spirit of the classics.
Enric did some imaginative cropping on it. It's obviously Rik van Looy, but cropping in closely anonymised it a bit. And so it's still Rik van Looy, but it also represents Flemish cycling and cyclists more generally. Loved it, and even though the casquette is from Van Looy's Flandria days, the colouring of the cover is also very Rik van Looy. It's Fima red, which I loved. So, what's in the magazine? First up, James, your interview and shoot with Pauline Ferrand-Prévot. Tell us a bit about this feature and why you decided to interview Pauline Ferrand-Prévot.
Well, I followed Pauline for years now, on social and just follow her racing career and this dogged pursuit to get the Olympic gold medal on the mountain bike race. It was such an emotional victory. And I didn't know what she was going to do after that. I thought that was it. And then she announces she's going to return to the road because, well, when she basically retired from the road, there was no women's Tour de France. And the fact that her favorite races are in France, her biggest victories are in France, she wanted to return and try to get the biggest of them all, the Tour Femme. And I thought that was just an amazing story, and it was just the perfect moment to sit down with her. So we organized a sit down with her during the January camp with the Visma team, and I followed her in training one day, and it was just lovely. She's a lovely woman. She could be so lighthearted in some ways and so focused in others. It's really very interesting. And she just says, when I get on a bike, I'm kind of a different person, especially when I pin a number on.
Very interesting as a rider, isn't she? She's a real all-rounder. She's won either world or Olympic titles in road, cyclocross, gravel, and mountain biking, and that's such an unusual spread. kind of a reflection of her breadth of talent, really.
Absolutely. I mean, she can do it all, and she just might win the Tour de France. Maybe not this year, but she's come in with a 3-year contract to reach her potential in the Tour. She's definitely going in with her eyes open this year. She's racing for the general classification, but not particularly saying I got to win it, but just to see how her body reacts going through a week-long stage race, racing for the GC after being away from the road for so long. So it's going to be a fascinating story to follow. And she's not alone. I mean, we have the return of Anna and even Kristen Faulkner, just to see how good she's going to be this year. So it's going to be a very exciting year. And the Tour is going to be the showcase for it all, I think.
Yeah, and she had a great ride at Strade Bianche, topically.
Yeah, third. I mean, I think it's her second race on the road. I believe she did the UAE Tour, and that's about it, So to come in and already be on the podium of a major race, I thought that was just tremendous.
Yeah, and she rode a very clever race. I think she probably knows that in a straight-up battle with Demi Vollering and, turned out to be Anna van der Breggen as well, on a steep climb like the finish of Strade Bianche, she needed to put herself out the front of the race first. So she rode a clever tactical race and hung on for third. So very impressive, and looking forward to seeing what she achieves later in the season. Next feature in the mag is our exploration of Milan-San Remo, but this isn't a race feature. This feature is called The Invention of the Poggio. Very topical, as we're recording about a week before Milan-San Remo. We all know the Poggio very well. It's the crux of Milan-San Remo. And looking at it, it's one of the first real kind of high points of the season. You could arguably say it's the 15 most exciting minutes of the cycling season. We know that the climb always defines the race. We know that it's 3.7 kilometres long. It averages 3.8%. But I think what we sometimes forget when we're deep in the excitement of the end of Milan-San Remo is that Poggio is actually a real place. People live there. They live there on race day, but also the other 364 days of the year. And that's what Davide wanted to find out about. And he found a thriving, close-knit community.
I thought it was a tremendous feature, tremendous perspective. Davide is a great writer, and he always comes up with these really unique ideas. Discovering sort of the artist community up on top, the different people that live up there, the community, I thought was just a tremendous way to flesh out this story. And then go back to the history of the Poggio in Milan-San Remo and how it came about, because it is just one of those iconics. Doesn't even describe it. It's bigger than life, this climb, and it has this outside role in the season that it makes it very special. I love watching them riding along the Italian Riviera for 100 kilometers, and then the tension mounting, and then bam, they hit that climb. I was so happy to see a really behind the scenes story about that climb and the making of the climb in Milan-San Remo.
Yeah, Davide used textbook journalistic research methods. He went to the bars and chatted to the people there. It's the best place to get the gossip. But it did kind of bring it more alive for me in some ways to see what the Poggio is like as a place. I'm always fascinated by the gap between what we see on TV in a bike race and what the reality is for people actually living there. Because, as we always say, bike racing is almost unique as a sport because it takes place out there in the real world where real people live.
It's a living, thriving place, they have wine vineyards everywhere, and they're actively being used. And it's a town that's alive during the whole year. So, yeah, a great story and a great way to bring us into the classics.
Yeah. Also, does look like a very lovely place to live. I think Davide described it as a community kind of caught between the sea and the mountains, and that summed it up perfectly. And he did also the artist colony you mentioned, Busana Vecchia. Fascinating place, a village that was destroyed by an earthquake in the 1880s and fell to ruin, but it's been rebuilt in subsequent decades, and a lot of artists live there, and it's just literally a stone's throw from the summit of the climb. So absolutely fascinating area, fascinating community, and I hope that anyone who reads this feature will still enjoy that excitement and tension and incredible racing on the Poggio at Milan-San Remo, but also get an extra perspective on this unique place. So that was The Invention of the Poggio by Davide Mazzocco. Next up, A Long Way From Home by Rachel Jary, who was very prescient in pitching me a Jonathan Narvaez interview when she was in Australia for the Tour Down Under. After Rachel interviewed Jonathan Narvaez, he went on to win the race. So I spoke to Rachel about this interview, and that's the next thing you're going to hear. I'm joined by Rachel Jary, Rouleur's staff writer, who interviewed Jonathan Narvaez for Rouleur 134. So, Rachel, Narvaez ended up winning the Tour Down Under, where you interviewed him, but you pitched him well before that, which shows good prediction skills on your part, but also shows that you were interested in him well before.
Yeah, exactly. I think he really made a kind of name for himself last season, especially when he beat Tadej Pogacar at the Giro d'Italia. He was one of the only riders to do it in the whole year, and he wore pink for a stage. And I think the way he raced with that kind of passion and aggression and his kind of fearless approach to attacking as well was just makes him a really endearing character and a really endearing rider. He's not especially charismatic in interviews or on TV and stuff, but I really felt like there was something else to uncover about him, especially given his interesting journey into the sport, which is quite unique compared to a lot of other riders, both from Ecuador, where he's from, and in general. So I just thought there was definitely stuff to be found out about him.
It's not a new thing that cyclists are coming from Ecuador and winning big races, because Richard Carapaz has won the Giro, finished on the podium in the Tour de France, won the King of the Mountains jersey, Olympic road race champion. But Narvaez is both similar and different from Carapaz, isn't he?
Yeah, he's got a similar background to Carapaz. Obviously, they both grew up in a similar place in Ecuador and they went to a cycling school there. However, Narvaez is different because he's more of a classics rider, and I think usually you expect these kind of GC, more climber types to come from those areas which are obviously higher altitude, but he kind of excelled on the velodrome early on and was breaking world records in junior individual pursuits, which is kind of what got his name out there. And he really loves the classics. He's got a real affinity to those races. That's where he thinks he can perform best. And that was one of the things that really stood out to me, was how passionate he was about telling everyone, look, riders from Ecuador, we're not just GC riders, we're not just climbers, we're really punchy rouleurs as well who know how to race. And especially impressive because he wants to really prove himself in races that are so alien to the ones he kind of grew up, to the roads he grew up racing in, and he's not afraid of that chaos of the cobbles and all of the intricacies of racing in Belgium and Holland. He's ready to fight, and I think that's a really nice thing about his character and makes him really unique compared to other riders from that country.
Ecuadorian cycling sounds a world apart, and you told some fascinating stories about Joxime Machin, who was scouting him and trying to arrange to kind of get in touch with him, and it's not as easy as all that, is it?
No, exactly. Yeah, it's a completely different world. I mean, yeah, Machdin told me that he had to call the Ecuadorian Cycling Federation in order to find out the road that Narvaez trained on every day, and then they put him in touch with a cafe on that road, and they said, look, he normally passes here around 10 a.m. So it was a case of waiting for the right time on the phone in the hope that Narvaez was passing at that particular moment so that they could get in touch. So, I mean, there's all these little barriers which you just don't even consider, but, you know, he didn't have his own mobile phone, so that was the only way to get in touch. It's all these barriers to entry which we don't really realise, or maybe people in Europe can take a little bit for granted, I think, how many extra challenges there are. And, you know, he spoke to me about when Narvaez first came over to Europe and he didn't even know what a rain jacket was, what a gabba was, and he didn't speak English. And, you know, the learning off the bike as well is something that he deserves credit for, I think, as well as what he's done on the bike.
The people you spoke to said that he was good at this. He's one of those people, he's, I think, resilient, got a lot of grit. And so when he was dropped into that environment, it was all alien to him. At the same time, he learned quickly and seemed to thrive as an under-23.
Yeah, that's what some of his teammates who rode with him at the time were talking to me about. They were like, we kind of knew that this guy didn't know as much as we did about the European racing scene and all of the kind of rules around it, but they were so impressed by his openness to learn and how quickly he was picking everything up. Even for me, speaking to him and doing the interview in English, only a few years ago, he was coming over to Europe and he said he could barely speak a word of English, and he's doing this interview with me in fluent, perfect English. And that's a sign in itself of somebody who's just incredibly intelligent with a real kind of thirst for knowledge and able to pick things up. And I think that's why he has been so attractive to some of the big teams, because he is such a reliable rider and he's open to learn and he's not difficult to work with and he's really clever and can pick things up. And I think that's why he spent so long on Ineos and was such a big part of the team there. And then UAE wanted him as well. So I can see why those teams are so keen to have him on their roster. His
trajectory through the World Tour has been good quality teams. He rode for Quick Step for a year, 6 years with Ineos, which it flew by. I didn't realise it didn't seem he was there as long as that, because he still seems to me to be quite a young rider. And now he's with UAE, and through that he's developed into a kind of classics focused rider. Like you said, he's not the GC rider. He's thriving in cobbled classics, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he was brought to Ineos initially when they were trying to build a strong South American team around Egan Bernal winning the Tour de France. And obviously we all know you need more than just pure climbers in a good Tour de France team. You need those guys who can pull on the flat, who can protect their leaders when it's, you know, those punchier, more chaotic stages. So he was filling that role for the team. And then obviously he's been on Ineos and seen it at its very best, and seen the sort of issues that the team's faced in the last few years. And now he's been picked up by UAE, and one of the reasons for that is that the Tour de France this year obviously goes all through the Ardennes, and they really need more good punchers to kind of protect Tadej Pogačar, and that is going to be a big part of Narvaez's role at UAE. He is going to be a domestique, which is something I was trying to speak to him a bit about as well, because he's a proven winner himself. I was wondering, how's he going to feel about going to a team with the best rider in the world, where he is going to have to be in that worker position more often. But he was very measured about it and was saying there's a split calendar for him, and he's going to get his chances in some of the smaller classics, but he's also very happy to work as a teammate of Pogačar, and he was really kind of complimentary to Pogačar about how he treats his other teammates. And he was also really saying how honoured he feels to learn from a rider like that and to be in the sport at the same time as one of the absolute greats. And he's kind of sees that as a bit of an honour, which I thought was a nice thing to say. He's
obviously won the Tour Down Under. He's been 6th in E3 Harelbeke in the past, 5th at San Sebastian, 6th in Strade Bianche. What are the races you think we can look out for him this year in terms of possibly having his own chances?
Well, he seems to think that the smaller classics, so like looking at E3, Harelbeke is one of the ones he mentioned. Ghent Wevelgem, maybe. He was saying those kind of slightly smaller classics are the ones we can expect to see him excel in this year. And then he also is a really good rider, usually for like I don't know if it'll be this year in Rwanda, but for the kind of punchy World Championship courses, he's really good at those sort of races with finishing circuits where it's like repeated efforts up short, punchy climbs. So any kind of parkour like that is where he really enjoys. And he can also climb pretty well on the longer climbs. Like we saw at Tour Down Under, he really held his own on Wollonga Hill, which obviously isn't an alpine mountain, but it's still a significant climb. So he's really versatile in that way. So I think a lot of it for him as well just depends on that race situation, and if he can get himself in the right move at the right time. And he's really good at looking for those opportunities and reading a race and going on instinct.
I agree that result in stage 1 of the Giro last year, where he beat Tadej Pogačar, I think maybe that wasn't given enough credit at the time.
I agree. I think it kind of did slip under the radar a little bit. And I said that to him as well. I was like, oh gosh, like, you know, you beat Tadej Pogačar and it wasn't really made such a big thing out of. How did it feel for you? Was it a really big deal for you? And he was sort of talking about how last year was such a busy year with the Olympics, and there was kind of some issues within Ecuadorian cycling about which rider would get the spot for the Olympic team. And he said all of that was so stressful that he never really processed what he did at the Giro, which was a bit of a shame. But I think at the same time, it's when he was kind of reflecting on it, when I was speaking to him, he did admit that it had given him a lot of confidence. But he also, like, what I really liked about him as a person is he's so measured. He was like, yeah, I beat Pogačar, but come on, like, I know I'm not better than him, and I'm glad I just had to only do it in one race, because now I've been on training camps with him and I can see how good he is. I'm glad I'm on the same team as him and not having to race him. You know, he was in no way kind of wanting to big himself up as the next big thing or the guy who could beat Pogačar. He was just like, it was a great race on a great day, but you know, he has like utmost respect for Pogačar still as the best cyclist in the world, basically.
They obviously impressed UAE because they liked him so much they signed him up for this season. So we're going to be watching the results of Jonathan Narvaez very closely through this season. You can read Rachel's interview with Jonathan Narvaez, A Long Way From Home, in Rouleur 134. Rachel, thanks for joining us. So that was Rachel Jary on Jonathan Narvaez. The next piece in the mag features the Rouleur debut for Barry Ryan, an ex-colleague of mine from my pro cycling days, who worked for Cycling News for many years. Barry's writing is beautiful, just beautiful, and he's taken a look at one of cycling's most idiosyncratic elements, the Flemish cycling media, in Read All About It. So Flemish Press Pack, you'll know them well, James. They're a fixture at the races. Flemish cycling media it's part pressure cooker, part circus, part impeccably sourced reporting, and it both reflects and magnifies the importance of cycling in Flanders. So amazing piece, really fascinatingly written, beautifully laid out by Enrique. What's your experience of the Flemish cycling media, James?
I love this piece because I know most of the actors in the piece, yet I didn't know so much about them that he fleshed out. He knows them well. He sits at the same tables with them in the press room. I'm mostly a photographer. I'm in and out of the press room, but I'm not trying to get the same quotes that Barry is getting with these guys and that stuff. So he really knows them well and really fleshed out the dynamics of the different competing journals and their relationship with the teams and the managers and the riders. I thought it was a tremendous piece. And, well, we also illustrated it, and I have to say trying to come up with a photographic means to conveying that was not the easiest thing. But Enrique, our art editor, did a wonderful job, I thought. It was beautifully laid out as well. So altogether, I just thought it was an enchanting story.
That layout, James, we were in Flanders recently, and we took some photographs of some old front pages of Het Nieuwsblad at the Tour Flanders Museum, partly for reference for this piece, but Enrique took these photos, took the colouring and the style and the design and kind of transposed it onto the feature, which has been laid out more like a newspaper article than a magazine feature in the way the columns work, which I loved. And so the feature is both about the Flemish cycling media, but also replicates them. My experience of Flemish cycling media is that they're very quirky. They're a kind of gang of Flemish Belgians who, especially at the Belgian races, there's so many of them, very quirky characters, very knowledgeable about their beat. And I think a colleague of ours, Andy Hood, always says that you know when it's time to go to the finish line from the press room, because that's when all the Flemish journalists leave. They've got the knack of knowing exactly when they need to stop watching the race on TV and going out to the finish to catch the finish line quotes. And they know the sport inside out.
Yeah, they're all very knowledgeable. I find them to be all very friendly. I've been on many races with them, had many dinners after races with them.
For us as cycling journalists, and for most cycling journalists around the world, 95% of them, the Tour de France is the biggest event in the cycling year, the most important event. For the Flemish journalists, it's the run-up to the classics and the classics themselves, which are the peak. And I think there's almost an element of regret in some of the quotes that Barry got, that, these days with Evenepoel and Wout van Aert shining in the Tour de France, they've had to extend their season somewhat, and they had to go to France, whereas before they could get the classics done and almost soft pedal for the rest of the year. But a fascinating story about a fascinating media ecosystem. And like I said at the beginning, an absolute pleasure to have Barry's words in the magazine. He's a writer I really admire.
Yeah, absolutely. And mind you, with Wout doing the Giro d'Italia and the Tour, these guys have to work double, triple overtime this year. My heart goes out for them.
So next up, the provider of one of the moments of the year in 2024. At the end of Paris-Roubaix Femmes, the TV cameras were focused on Fifer Georgie, who had been told she'd come fourth, and she looked pretty disappointed and almost unhappy. But there was that moment, the result must have come up on the big screen, because suddenly her face absolutely lit up. And I don't think I've ever seen anyone so happy after a bike race. Rebecca Charlton has been following Fifer Georgie's career for years, and she interviewed her for this feature, An Old Head on Young Shoulders. And I caught up with Becca to ask her to tell us about her interview. Rebecca Charlton, thank you for joining us again on Rouleur Conversations.
Thanks so much for having me back on. I mean, I just have to start with the caveat that I've got a newborn baby and I haven't slept in many, many, many days, if not weeks at this point. So hopefully I'll be able to string some sentences together for you today.
Thanks very much. If you could, it will make up for the rest of us being unable to. It's actually funny, your last contribution to the mag before this last issue was a guest column about cycling and motherhood. How's motherhood with a 6-week-old?
Well, this is the thing. I realised in writing that column that it was just before I had my second child, and I was kind of talking about that 4 a.m. where you just know that you're not ever going to go to bed. And of course now that's become even more advanced with 2. I just don't go to bed anymore. I don't know if I'm even nocturnal. I just sort of stay up 24 hours a day. But it's super efficient. I've been getting some writing work done in the small hours, so no complaints.
Thanks for going over and beyond. So, Fifer Georgie, who is in the latest edition of Rouleur with a headline, An Old Head on Young Shoulders. What was it about Fifer Georgie that made you think you'd like to interview her?
She's really fascinated me over her years in the peloton, and I was really fortunate, as I say in the article, to have met her and interviewed her very, very early on when she was actually still studying for her A-levels at school. And it was one of those interviews where I was prepping for it, and I had to really think about whether my question was actually correct. You're still at school, you've signed to the world tour with a contract. Is my research accurate? And of course it was. And she was juggling school and then going to ride in the professional peloton at the weekend, then coming back on a Monday morning. And I just found that so interesting. And it wasn't just that she was playing that down, it was just that she was managing to succeed academically at such a high level whilst juggling all of that. And I then found out when I was following her on social media and things like that she's an exceptional artist. She's not only absolutely acing school, acing her results on the road, but she's also an artist. And I just thought, I really want to sit down with this rider and learn more about her, because as much as she's done a lot of post-race interviews, she's given insights into her racing, I wanted to find out more about her on a human level, because I think she's just brilliant.
And she was a very, very early starter, wasn't she? When she first appeared on the scene, I recognised her name because I remember reading copies of Cycling Weekly, and a rider called Fifer Georgie used to win races. He was not a Tour de France racer, but he was a good national level rider who won significant races in the UK. And I'd see his name pop up every now and again. And it's quite an unusual name. I think it's of Greek origin, the surname Georgie. I haven't met many Georgies. So when Fifer Georgie came along, I thought, I wonder if she's related. She was, and she started extremely young.
She did. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned her dad, because I've got to know him through various events in the industry and through his work with Cure Leukemia, and I've been working alongside them as well. And they have these brilliant fundraising events, and he supports as a ride captain. So I've got to know him through that. And I think he is just such a wonderful personality that gives so much back to the sport. And actually you can see why Fifer has that grounded approach to everything she does. It is, I think, through that amazing family unit, and you can just see that when you speak to Peter, that he's instilled that in his children, and it's amazing. But in terms of the age she got started, yeah, I mean, I knew she started young, but 4 years old to be racing. I thought I was an early starter because I was racing track at 7. So I always thought that sounded a bit crazy when I used to tell people that. But no, she was much earlier than the age of 7, and just rose and rose and rose through the ranks. But I think even when she's talking about her racing as a very young child, and when her dad talks about it, you can tell there still was that edge of like, I want to be really good at this, even though I'm about 5 years old.
Yeah. And she raced at Herne Hill when she was young, and then the family moved to near Bristol, and she raced at the Castle Coombs circuit there, and just basically never stopped.
No, and you've probably got the better local knowledge of that. I obviously had the local knowledge of Herne Hill, and it was somewhere that I grew up racing a lot. And yeah, it's a venue that gave so much to the sport. So it was really nice to see that that's actually where she started her cycling routes as well. And yeah, as you say, she started, she never stopped. And I think she, again, has achieved so much as a young rider. Not only just brilliant results, brilliant ability to perform a role as a lead out, but everything she's come up against with such severe injuries, and to come back from that and to say, I didn't have a doubt that I would come back. Yeah, that resilience, I can't sort of shout about that enough as well.
Yeah, because she cracked a bone in her neck, didn't she, last year? Not for the first time, I think, and it's been quite a long rehab.
Yeah, second time that she'd fractured vertebrae and basically had a fractured neck. And she said the moment it happened at the Tour de France Femmes avec Zwift last summer, she just knew the same feeling. She knew that she'd been there before, and it was a huge recovery. And I think it's something that we, across men's and women's cycling in our sport, we see people come back so quickly. And I know it's a topic you and I have discussed with a lot of riders, but it's so easy to just see them back and, oh, well, they're fine now, and forget what a journey it has been to come back. So again, I wanted to really press her to talk about that reality, because she will just modestly say, it's been a bit difficult, but I'm back. But it's been tremendously hard for her, and she's back with a smile, and she's back to her best.
And speaking of her race results, I mean, she's a 3-time national road champion. She was third in Paris-Roubaix last year. She has got quite a special position in her team. She's an integral part of the lead out, and she operates as a road captain. Most interesting result there is maybe not the win, the third in Paris-Roubaix. That moment where the TV cameras caught her reaction to realising she'd actually come third was one of the moments of the year for all of us, wasn't it?
It really was. I picked it as my moment of the year, and it really was, because although it wasn't a victory, and she says this herself, it was a victory. Getting on that podium, getting third, especially after apparently quite a few people were casting a doubt on whether she had or not got on the podium. It made that moment really, really huge for her. And it was also very telling of what her ambitions are in the sport. And as you just mentioned, being able to span individual results, be a multiple national champion, but also really, really focus on just being the best possible lead out. I think that's where she's just got this sort of unprecedented skill set, really. But yeah, Paris-Roubaix Femme was just amazing, because the nature of that final sprint just showed her versatility even further. And as I say, what she could potentially go on to achieve in this sport, I think she knows there's a hell of a lot more to come. You
mentioned she's a talented artist. She is a pretty dab hand in the kitchen at baking cakes as well. Yeah. It seems like she's, this speaks to the fact that she's probably pretty grounded as well, which is the kind of thing that enables you to get through challenging phases.
Completely. And I think that she's remained completely unaffected by her success. I truly believe that. She's humble, she's modest, but equally, I think the way she's adapted into that road captain role at such a young age, it shows that she does know what she's got, what her capabilities are, but she manages it so well to be such a brilliantly well-rounded human on and off the bike, really, and that ability also to switch that race aggression off when you're off the bike and just be a decent person.
Becca, I'm going to let you get back to being the mother of a 6-week-old. Thank you for being on Rouleur Conversations.
Sorry for any screaming in the background. It's all under control, I'm sure, Ed. Thanks so much.
Standard. Thank you. So that was Becca Charlton on Fifer Georgie. Next up, How I Won Liège-Bastogne-Liège by 7 of the people who have actually done so. We spoke to Lizzie Deignan, Sean Kelly, Andy Schleck, Bob Youngles, Danilo De Luca, Silvio Contini and Eric Van Lanker, who shared their insights about how to win La Doyenne. James, you must have shot Liège-Bastogne-Liège on several occasions. Before we hear from a few of our winners, tell us about your perspective of this race.
Oh, I've been there a few times, I have to say, and quite like it. Liège gets a bad rap, because it's this big industrial town in the heart of Wallon, the kind of the poor southern part of Belgium. So it has this sort of dark side to it, and yet there's a kind of inner warmth to Liège as well. The people are pure fans, and the hills around Liège are some of the hardest hills you're going to find in any one-day race in the world, and they produce, amazing races, and it's the oldest classic as well. So it's steeped in history and ambiance, and it's a race I love very much.
It's interesting actually, because initially, in my early years as a cycling fan, I kind of preferred Liège-Bastogne-Liège to the cobbled classics. Reason being, as a young cycling fan, there was only really information about the Tour de France available, and I got into cycling that way. And as I started reading cycling magazines and realising there was a whole season of cycling races, I recognised the names who were competing in Liège-Bastogne-Liège, because at that time they were the same riders competing in the Tour de France. And in the Tour of Flanders and Paris-Roubaix, races which I much prefer these days, I didn't really recognise so many of the names. It seemed to be different riders competing for them generally. So initially as a cycling fan, Liège was my favourite classic, but as the years have gone by, it's steadily fallen down in my rankings, but it's still a race with a lot of character. It's the oldest race, and like you say, easy to judge Liège by its post-industrial gloom, but at the same time, it's a tough race. There's a lot to like about it. How would you win Liège-Bastogne-Liège, James?
With a lot of luck. I would have to go a very long way out and hope to scrape around to the finish.
I think I'd have to start on the Saturday. Let's hear from the experts about how to win Liège-Bastogne-Liège. They know better than we do. We're going to hear from Lizzie Deignan, Sean Kelly and Andy Schleck in that order.
I think the year I won it was on tactics. It was an extremely cold, dark morning. I think it was October by then. And you could feel that not a lot of people wanted to be racing that hard that early in the morning. And there was a particular moment. I always have good position in the group, and it was wet. And there was a particular point just before, I don't know what the town's called. You descend into a town, there's cobbles, and then you go kind of up this climb. Basically, the descent into that town it's quite technical. It's quite shaded, and I could feel that there was a group going off the front, not necessarily because somebody attacked. It was just getting strung out on the descent because it was so wet and cold. There was a moment where I was still in a gilet, so I was kind of stealth. We got into this town and I just slipped off the front with another girl from Movistar, and immediately I could sense that the favourites weren't at the front of the peloton behind me because they hesitated. Yeah. The peloton didn't react to me moving across to the breakaway, so I knew that was my opportunity. And then in the breakaway I was just forcing it the whole time, and Ellen van Dijk was in the breakaway as well, and she said to me, Lizzie, you have to go on La Redoute because you're the strongest in the group. So actually I listened to Ellen, and that's why I went. I felt that was on a good day, and I think it's still quite a way out, but I think on that kind of course you're better being ahead than trying to like for me to try and match some of the favourites on the actual climbs themselves would have been too difficult. So it's kind of getting ahead of the action. I really remember as well a bloke on the motorbike there. He really was willing me to win. It was really nice. he wasn't motivating me. I wish he was, but he was giving me lots of time checks and lots of encouragement. And sometimes when you're on your own at the front of the race and your team car's not there, you do sort of feel like you're in no man's land just waiting to be caught. So it was nice to have that. I could tell that the gap was coming down really quickly, and at the same time I was going downhill, so into the finish it's downhill, and there was only so much power I could put into the pedals. I was absolutely blowing to pieces, like I was really in a bad way, and the gap was getting scarily close. I just tried not to panic, and because it's also about not taking too many risks on that wet descent as well. So I knew I just needed to stay upright, and I knew it would be close, but I thought she would run out of road as long as I didn't completely blow up or crash. I was quite confident that she'd run out of road.
Liège was a one which was. Yeah, it was a one which was difficult for me against, the better climbers, like a Kirkillion, for example, and some of the other guys that would have been up there, like a Greg LeMond, for example. He'd be a better climber than me, so I had to dig deep to win the first one, but the second one was more complicated because of the team I was in, and I remember my tactic was that I have to try and get into a move before we get into the final. Because then with the team we had like a Rooks, Tunison were real good climbers. I was going to be maybe playing the game of just blocking from behind if it went to the final, if they went in a group. So I decided that I'd try and get into a move if there was a right move going, and there was a very good one went away. You look at Phil Anderson, Delgado, Filippo, the French guy.
Yeah.
We had a good group. So up to that point, everything okay. Got into the group, and then had a nice advantage. But then they started to play around a bit. I remember in the final, the final 15 kilometers before Liège, they didn't really want to ride a lot, and I remember saying, okay, well, I'm not going to ride at all. I said, Rooks and Tunison's behind. I said, I have teammates behind coming up. I think with about 15 kilometres to go, was left of the peloton. They got to us 10, 15 seconds, I think, max.
Yeah.
We're almost closed down.
It was always like my all-time favorite race since, I basically grew up because, it's close by, yeah? So, Bastogne is, just across the border from Luxembourg at a certain point. So, it's a home race basically for me. Even it's not held in Luxembourg, but for me, it's my all-time favorite. For the Luxembourgish supporters, they can access it quite easily, and even go to Houffalize on the different months and cheer for you. But it's the oldest one-day race. It's the oldest one-day race existing, I believe. Yeah, La Doyenne, the old lady. So it makes it kind of special, and the route does not really change over the last 100 years. Of course, the final have a bit, but the Col des Rosiers remains the Col des Rosiers, and Mur de Houffalize remains the Mur de Houffalize. So that is not anything which is somehow different than the years before.
Yeah. And why do you think you were good at this race?
But it is 100% climbing race. It's a tough one. There's no luck involved in Liège. The strongest wins eventually. It's brutal long and with the accumulation of the climbs and often bad weather as well. You got to be tough. When it came down to Liège, I was quite confident before. It's watts per kilo. My shape was really good and that's I think it's the only race where it's only the pedals who count. Of course, you shouldn't crash and it's helpful to have a strong team around you, who makes the race also hard before. But it comes down to the legs, to the best legs in the peloton. There's no hiding in Liège. I definitely had the strategy. I had the whole team, working for me, make it hard, don't cruise along, but, start really early, 200 kilometers before the finish, basically, to put the pressure on, to make the peloton suffer early, not the peloton, but my main contender that year, which was, Valverde, Gilbert, Purito, Rebellin, that I could make the difference in the end. So it was everything quite clear and lined up. And for me, basically, until the Redoute, the race was not on. Until the Redoute, it was just for me, okay, trust in your team, rely on your team, stay in the leg, save as much possible energy as you can. And then my tactic was clear that I would go in Rochefort-Faucon. It was clear that I want to attack there, and it was clear that I need 30 seconds on top in order to have a chance to win the race. Yeah. But everything went well.
And Gilbert went away before you. Were you concerned at his attacks? He was maybe 30 seconds ahead.
I mean, when Gilbert attack you and you're not concerned, you are probably somewhere in the gruppetto and don't have anything to do with the outcome of the race. So of course you are concerned, but at the same time, I did not try to follow him. I let him make his move. I saw exactly where he attacked, and I just kept faith in my plan. I only had a plan A. There was no plan B that day. And when I catched him in Rochefort-Faucon, it was quite clear that I did not want to take him, with me. So I went in his wheel. I passed him. I saw that he wasn't, in a hurt bag, and I tried to drop him as soon as possible, which worked out well that day. It was still a long way, from Rochefort-Faucon. It's not that on top is the climb, but it was. Tactic-wise, it was good. I had something like 35 or 38 seconds on top, and I knew, the flat part on top of Rochefort-Faucon, you just, you gotta paddle, and the downhill, you gotta take, risks, even if it's not a fast downhill, but because the peloton behind, if they organize themselves, they can catch back time. But I did not believe. I believed, but I wasn't sure until I hit the bottom of Anse, because then you do Mont Saint-Nicolas, which is a tough climb as well. So if you have a puncher behind with 50 seconds or something, it can go quick that he closed the gap and attack after attack. So I was really cautious and, always maintained something under the pedal without losing time, because I knew that Mont Saint-Nicolas, we're doing the whole Rochefort-Faucon, up, on the limit, basically, on the maximum. Downhill where you have to pedal, where you have to, keep the speed and keep the momentum. So I kept it a little bit under the pedal for the Mont Saint-Nicolas. And then on top, I could re-accelerate. And then my gap, I think, went over a minute, and then was quite, not quite clear. That sounds a bit arrogant, but quite confident that I would make it to the finish. It was probably one of the best days of my life, or let's say, not of my life, on the bike on my life. I could have gone another 10K. I think it wouldn't have made a difference. I was in an excellent day. I had Bjarne Riis behind me, who always knew exactly how he need to talk to me. And Bjarne Riis rider wins with 1.5 minutes and with 1 minute. So he kept it quite dramatic until the last kilometer in Côte d'Ance, and said, "You have to go to the line. You have to go to the line." But yeah, I was smarter than him, and when I saw that I had 1:25 on the bottom, I said I want to make him the favor and finish with over a minute on the finish line. But the communication was there intact, and like I said, until the last K, quite stressful. I had basically half of Luxembourg was in Anse that day. Because also, it was a kind of, I was the main favorite, I was the main favorite of that day. So of course everybody had this hope and this hope for me to win, and that confidence in me to bring home a classic and bring home Liège. So raising the arms, it was a big step for me there. To be honest, if I recall back correctly, I did not have tears in my eyes, but I was not far from it. But I was never that sentimental about me racing or about me winning. But that day, I was like, okay, I won Liège, because I was still a kid. I was still the same person who was cheering on the side of the road when Bartoli made his move in Redoute, and I was standing there. I was still the same Andy, but now it was me who raised the arms and was quite glorious.
So that was Lizzie Deignan, Sean Kelly and Andy Schleck explaining how to win Liège-Bastogne-Liège. I'd say they probably missed off the main strategy in the mid-2020s, which is to be Tadej Pogačar. Next up is our cover feature, James, The Last Emperor, Rik van Looy. So Rik van Looy was the most successful classics rider of all time. He won everything in a career which had its heyday in the 1950s and 60s. He sadly died in December, a few days before his 91st birthday. And James, you went to see the race named after him, the Grand Prix Rik van Looy, and to meet the great man himself last September. So tell us about that encounter and about your image of Rik van Looy.
Well, as long as I've been a cyclist, I've had this fascination with Van Looy, the guy who won every classic. And you have to understand, when they say every classic, back in the day, classics like Paris-Brussels or Paris-Tours were major races. To win those as well as the monuments. Today we kind of only think about the monuments and then maybe a Flèche Wallonne or Genf-Wevelgem, and some of us Strade and Bianchi now. But back then there was a whole series of other classics that this was before the World Tour existed, right? And they were considered great races, and Van Looy won them all, which is more than even Eddy Merckx can say, because Merckx never was able to win Paris-Tours, for example, and Van Looy did. Van Looy was a road sprinter. He's a great cobbled classics rider, and yet he could also win Liège. He could do it all in the classics. He was that late 50s, early 60s, so stylish, one of the most beautiful riders. So I really wanted to meet him and interview him. I've been working on this kind of long ongoing feature about historic champions for the last several years, and since I've been building on that, the one guy I wanted to meet was Van Looy. And it turned out to be one of the hardest. It took me about 3 years to finally get him. But I got him, and I'm very happy about that.
And what was he like?
I think we could say coy, if we wanted to put it nicely, graciously. Van Looy had a reputation which preceded him when it came to dealing with the press. And I have to say that he lived up to his reputation right up to the end of his life. He was not an easy interview. I think he had better things to do that day, I'll be honest. But I got the interview. I sat down with him. He answered my questions. I was able to talk to one of his old mechanics. I talked with his daughters, his granddaughters, a whole bunch of people. I went and found with their local collector one of his original jerseys, which had his name etched in the back tag, and I brought that to him. Not that it got much of a stir from him, but it made a lot to me, and I'm happy to have gotten a nice portrait of him with that. So all in all, it was not the easiest to put together, I'll put it that way, but it was very satisfying.
Had a reputation of having quite a strong personality, and you actually interrogated this a bit in the feature, that he felt at the end of his career that he was being overshadowed by the coming Eddy Merckx. Their careers crossed over at the very, very end, and following a very unusual and successful career, like an outstanding career for Van Looy, he was immediately eclipsed, and I think that seemed to have an effect on him. Merckx won almost everything that he did, plus Grand Tours and more. Never did crack Paris Tour. But I got the feeling that Van Looy didn't adjust well to being outshone by Merckx. And then when he retired from cycling, he stopped cycling, stopped racing, and pretty much didn't go back to it.
No, he did a little de-essing for a while, but from what I can make of it is his heart was only half in it. He wasn't nearly as driven as he was as a cyclist. And he started raising horses and, just focusing on the people that mattered to him, his friends, his family, and, more power to him. But yeah, the whole Merckx thing, I believe, really did leave a very lasting, rather bitter impression on him. He was, Merckx was turned pro with him. But I think Merckx understood very quickly that he needed to move on because he had his own ambition, and obviously rightly so. Yeah, it's funny how, bike fans can be a bit flaky. We can go from one champion to the next, and the guy who's raising his arms is our next best friend, and then easily forgotten as soon as there's a little bit of a waver on that, and he felt that he felt that very strongly, I think, and I think that has sort of filtered his dealing with his own career. For a couple of years, I was really negotiating to get this interview, and I was just told he doesn't want to look back on his career, doesn't want to talk about the past. He's like, that was then, this is now. And the only thing that really seemed to motivate him was working with young riders. He had a cycling school for many years, and then he got involved with this community within his town who put together a race in his honor, and he wanted that race to be for the youth. That's all, I think, very honourable.
Greatest classics rider of all time. The Last Emperor is in Rouleur 134. The next feature in the magazine is one of our joint projects, James, Urban Flanders. Now, genesis of this feature was that we know Flanders so well as cycling fans. We watch the races. If we get particularly nerdy about it, we look at the maps, we see how the whole thing fits together. And the action in these races tends to take place out there in the fields, among the farms, on the cobbled roads, the farm tracks of Flanders, and we're kind of very attached to the Flemish Ardennes, which is this picturesque range of very low wooded hills, just where the language border between Flanders and Wallonia is, down in the southwest corner of Belgium. And we think of this as a rural area, and the races take place out in the rural areas. But all the roads that we fetishise in Flanders, what do they connect? They connect the towns and urban settlements, and I feel that this is a unique corner of the country, not just for its rural context, but for the towns, which are as much a part of Flanders as the fields and woods and cobbled climbs.
They all have this historic reputation if you're a bike racing fan, and anybody who's ever been to these races knows these towns. I can't think of how many times I've been through Brakel and Reims. I'll be at a race, I'll be out following somebody training, and all of a sudden here we are in Reims again, or here we are in Brakel again. It's like all roads lead to these little towns, and it gets confusing. I know I'm almost any time I've been to a race or been up there doing some sort of cycling coverage, I've been through some of these towns, and yet I don't really even know how they all are stitched together. And so that's basically what we went and did. We went and looked at these towns, their own identity, the races that are unique to them, and a bit of the people that live there. And it was really a fascinating way to look at a different side of Flanders.
The race doesn't just take place out in the countryside. Like some of the climbs, even urban climbs. We took a look at 10 Bossenstraat, which is in Brakel, where it was on the old Tour of Flanders route that finished over the Muur and Bosberg. Also appears in Omloop these days. We also went to Ronse to look at the Oude Kruisberg. And the Kruisberg, although the top half is a cobbled climb out of the town, the bottom half is kind of a steady drag on concrete roads through terraced houses. And I just think it's amazing that, like we said with the Poggio, 364 days a year, that's a regular road where regular people live and park their cars and take their shopping home and just live opposite the house on the other side of the road. And then we also looked at Gerardsbergen, which is slightly different. The Muur, very different climb, although it is still an urban climb. The climb starts from the river in town, goes through the market square, up past the cathedral, up through a very nice neighbourhood, and then up into the Muur and up to the church. And we kind of focus on the top part, but the bottom part, it is literally the town centre in Gerardsbergen. And so these climbs, they're urban climbs rather than rural ones.
I think Gerardsbergen was perhaps my favourite, and that climb is, I mean, it actually even starts before the river if you want. There's this sort of big kind of bleak bridge. I think it goes over the train. It just sort of like pops out of nowhere. And I mean, that alone, for you or I, would be a climb. I think those guys just sort of roll over it in the big ring, keeping their momentum up, and then it drops down. Then you cross the river, and then it's that long drag starts up to the church, through the center, past what we saw was Remco Evenepoel's fan club, and it just keeps going and winding. And just when you think you're at the top or at a plateau, it goes up again, and it just gets steeper and more narrow until you hit those final 2 pitches of the Muur, that long, straight, narrow thing in the trees, and then that last loop around the chapel. So it's such a unique town and climb. And then we went through some other towns like Rouleur. It was a ton of fun this weekend discovering it. And I have a better sense of where those towns are now, actually.
Yeah, it's an amazing little region. Everything's very, very close by, and I've found the more time I spend there, the more I can piece it together. And that is our feature, Urban Flanders. That's about all we've got time to go into depth about, James, but there are still quite a few more features in Rouleur 134. Rachel Jary interviewed Elise Shabby, who's a fascinating individual. She's a qualified medical doctor, once won the Geneva Half Marathon and represented Switzerland in kayaking, and she's just transferred to the FDJ Suez team. We've got a photo feature on the Tour du Faso, James, which maybe you can tell us a little bit about.
Yeah, well, about 20 years ago, I was invited to cover this race in Burkina Faso. And back in the day, ASO, the tour organizers, had kind of gotten behind this race. It existed before, but they got it kind of come on board as a partner to try to give the African cycling a bit of a boost, And it was a wild ride. I think that's the title, actually. It was. We went on these completely dirt roads before we ever had this sport called gravel racing, and the guys they were racing on whatever bike they could get. Some were better equipped than others, but it was sort of mayhem, but it was also beautiful because it's like hitting the Ehrenberg Forest every day for every stage in a race. It was just it's high. They were coming in these roads at high speeds, crashes or mechanical breakdowns. There's dust everywhere. It was a fascinating race, and then to look back 20 years later and see how far African cycling has come, I just thought it'd be interesting to go back kind of to that point in history, and I'm really happy we found some pages for it.
Yeah, that photo feature on the Tour du Faso, A Wild Ride, is in Rouleur 134. We've also got Art Cycle, featuring Au Vélodrome by Jean Metzinger, another masterpiece of early to mid 20th century art, which you've been to see, I believe, in the past, James.
Oh, many times. It's my little pilgrimage. Anytime I go to Venice, I go to the Peggy Guggenheim Foundation to see this piece of art. It's actually one of the masterpieces of cycling and art, right? I mean, I've had many people say, "Oh, maybe you should do this Metzinger piece for art cycling," and I've been like, "I know, I'm holding it, I'm gonna do it because you have to do it." And this was the right time. We're in the classics issue, but it's also, it's housed in Italy, so we're not far from the Italian issue, and it was, which one are we going to put it in? It went into this one, into the classics issue, and it's a stunning piece. It was actually of the winner of, I think it was the 1912 Paris-Roubaix. It's a beautiful synthesis of cubism and also futurism, and it has a very, very big role in the museum, as it's considered one of the pieces that brings those two movements together the best. But it's very much about a bike race.
Of course, our readers will know that the winner of the 1912 Paris-Roubaix was Charles Croupelant.
Exactly. He had a pretty good little career. I think he had the yellow jersey at one point, and then I think he ended up in prison. I can't remember it exactly, but it was a storied career, to say the least.
Also in the mag, we've got features about Polymer Workshop. Our Explore feature is in Sichuan. We've got Question Time with Finn Fisher-Black and much, much more. Rouleur 134 is available to buy as an individual magazine, or why not treat yourself to a subscription at rouleur.cc. Listeners to Rouleur Conversations are eligible for a 15% discount off the price of a regular subscription, which you can get by going to rouleur.cc/subscribe and entering the code podcast15. Subscribing supports our magazine, website and this podcast and enables us to keep making good things for our members. James, that's it for this edition of Rouleur Conversations. Thanks very much for the conversation.
Thank you, Ed. It's always a pleasure.
You have been listening to Rouleur Conversations. Rouleur Conversations is made by the editorial staff of Rouleur magazine. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Rouleur and on Instagram at Rouleur magazine, or visit our website at rouleur.cc. This edition of Rouleur Conversations was produced by Joseph Perry of Content is Queen.